welcome to ID5's myth-busting video series. Today we're going to talk about a new topic that kind of came to the scene a few months ago, ID bridging. A lot of publishers have been using ID bridging capabilities to compensate for the absence of cookies in certain browsers. And so there's a question, ID bridging as a solution for cookie deprecation in the future, myth or reality? To address this topic, I've got Mike O'Sullivan from Sincera today with me here.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Great to have you. He's the man who looks behind the curtain of what publishers are doing with advertising technology at Sincera.
That's right.
So let's start with an easy question, Mike.
Yeah.
What is ID bridging?
So ID bridging is an extension or a behavior that came out of a lot of work that ID providers were doing, and they sort of noticed that there were some scenarios where a lot of DSPs were not actually bidding on these cookieless identifiers, and the DSPs hadn't done the work to actually decision against these new cookieless identifiers. So ID Bridges came around and said, well, instead of you taking an actual cookieless ID, what if I actually, in this cookieless environment like Safari, what if I just find an ID from Chrome that's on the same device via an IP address and so forth. If I take that Chrome ID and I bring it into the Safari environment and I bridge that ID over, and you know what? We're in Safari, but I'm just going to send the DSP the ID that they're used to, their legacy cookie-based DSP ID, on that bid request. So it's sort of porting over or bridging in legacy cookie-based IDs in most cases over to cookieless environments like Safari and iOS.
It's like building a graph of IDs that are on different devices on different universe, and then finding within this graph the ID that works best for the buyers, or optimizing between the different IDs. Is that a fair?
Yeah, it could be different devices, but often it's just different browsers on the same device.
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
And so what are the types of IDs that are being bridged by those providers?
I think overwhelmingly the most popular IDs being bridged are DSP and SSP cookie-based IDs. There are some providers, ID bridge providers, who are doing some really interesting things with cookieless IDs and bridging those over. Those can be deterministic, partially deterministic, so on and so forth. That's really interesting, I think. But I think by and large, the most common behavior for a lot of these bridge providers is cookieless IDs from one browser to the other.
Okay, and what is the impact of those services? What are publishers seeing with this type of implementation?
I think because they are bridging over the IDs that the DSP has spent 10 plus years getting to know and bid accurately on, publishers are seeing an ad spend impact. So that's the sort of immediate impact that's occurring. I think it's sort of that's the positive from the publisher's perspective. I think what you're also seeing though, up until very recently, is the buyers sort of saying hey, you're not disclosing this, right? And so there's been some friction as a part of this, where it's we need to understand what's the provenance of this particular ID. We also need to understand, and I think we see a lot of buyers asking questions on does the publisher have a contractual agreement with this bridge provider? Does the publisher know that this bridge provider is actually doing this? So I think a lot of questions on provenance and contractual relationships have sort of come to the forefront in conjunction with this big sort of immediate ad spend impact, because again it's providing the DSPs the IDs that they've known really well for many years.
Yeah, so it's kind of using the pipes and the processes that have been established for years to optimize the way we're monetizing inventory that isn't necessarily well known.
Yeah.
What's the you use provenance, so I'm gonna. What can we do better, right? How can we disclose that better? I'm sure provenance is not a term that you use out of chance.
No, that was intentional. So I think we at Sincera, we don't operate an ID. Yep. We don't transact on media, but we sort of kind of leaned into this conversation with the IAB, which is we don't particularly have an opinion on ID bridging. If publishers want to use it, that's great. But it needs to be disclosed.
Yep.
And I think if we're going to grow the open internet, these types of behaviors need to be responsibly disclosed, and then DSPs and buyers can choose to transact on them or not to transact on them, right? And I think that was, a really critical update to the OpenRTB spec. It was, a lot of fierce debate. about different elements and how do they, what's updated and where. But I think moving the disclosure line up is like really, really critical in order to maintain legitimacy within and sort of like maintain legitimacy of what we think the bid request is, like essentially a contract, right? And if there are swaps or changes that are silently occurring, it degrades entities' abilities to trust in the bid request.
100%.
So it's critical that we got that change through. And I think anyone, if you're a publisher, I think you want to be talking to your bridge providers, you want to be talking to your SSPs, and you want to be making sure that they're updating their specs to support this level.
The work that's being done with the Tech Lab around ID
Right.
Provenance. Shout out to the Tech Lab's effort to kind of clean up the space and kind of bring more transparency and more disclosure. Okay. What happens to ID bridging as a concept when there are no cookies anymore at all in any browser?
Yeah.
Does it go away?
Yeah, I don't think it goes away, but I think what the impact shrinks dramatically.
Okay.
Right? Because like I said at the beginning, there's this sort of big spectrum of ID bridge providers. Some do, cookieless ID bridging. The majority, I think, of the activity is cookied,
Cookie ID bridging.
cookie IDs based bridging. They also different providers may have different thresholds for when they feel confident about doing a bridge or not. So there is a spectrum out there is sort of point one, but point two, how does it change? A lot of that work that's happening on the that's entirely based on these cookie-based IDs goes away.
Yeah.
Because you don't have these cookie IDs are only going to start falling off. There's no new cookie IDs being created in browser A to bridge them into browser B. So I think that bridging will have to change. It will become far more valuable on an individual level, but the amount of bridging events will dramatically shrink, I think, as a result. So I think it will be a big shift from what publishers are experiencing now, which is sort of near universal enrichment of their traffic, which is primarily driven by
cookie IDs being bridged over.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly. Also, you won't be able to measure, because how do you measure the lift? Measuring the lift requires you to know a cookied environment versus non-cookied, and then now everything's going to be non-cookied.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much for that. So ID bridging, useful practice, can generate uplift in revenue for publishers, need to be disclosed, need to be transparent. The work of the AB Tech Lab, very, very important for us as an industry. Not a long-term solution for cookieless world though, because, well, if you don't have cookie IDs to bridge anymore, it won't matter. So thank you very much, Mike, for your knowledge and for your expertise. Thanks everyone for listening, and see you in the next episode.